Hello, this video is all about the assembly of the dock flat pack version for the Festool Domino. Now you can probably just look at the picture and assemble this. It's pretty straightforward, but I've got a few little tips and tricks and some key features that'll make something awesome even better. We'll begin with the assembly of the dock for the DF500. It's a bit more popular, and then we'll switch to the XL700. Let's jump right in. All right, a few things that you'll need. Of course, some glue, clamps. You need a drill, preferably with a countersink. And of course, a screw gun, or at least a driver, right? I've got some of this grit grip sandpaper. This stuff is awesome. It's double-sided. I'm using 150, but you could use anything from 120 to about 220. And perhaps a large hammer. Now, the front piece for your DF500 may or may not have come with this emblem and a cavity. If it did, now would be a good time to glue it in place. Make sure you get my name straight. This is a bit of a cooking show format, so I've got one glued in place. Or if you'd like, you could just drill that out or drill it and add your own. It's 1.5 inches diameter and 22 thousandths thick. You could even use the other side and put this to the inside if you want. And remember, this front piece is wider at the top. Before you assemble anything, start out by lightly and carefully sanding all the faces and the edges, perhaps by machine or by hand or both, and hold off breaking or knocking off any of the corners for now. I like to start assembly with the cradle, and we got to make sure that this rounded edge goes to the top on both sides. These are non-handed. Each side is beveled at 1 degree, so it will go on either side. Just make sure that this rounded portion is on the inside of the cradle. Of course, we would add a bit of glue. That's where the hammer comes in. Now you want to make sure that you're tight in both directions. In other words, tight this way and tight that way, which will tighten with the screw, but of course you could add a clamp this way, something like that. Pre-drill. You may be tempted to add 4 screws instead of 2. I know a lot of people want to assemble with screws here, but in my opinion, that gets too close to the edge here and it could split. While the cradle's drying, we can turn our attention to this. This is the front. You'll want to add this spacer block in here. A couple of dabs of glue. Put that in place. You can simply just clamp it. If you don't have a deep enough reach clamp, you can just add a little bit of weight to that. Set that aside. We can assemble this guy. This will go either way, right? So again, we'll add a little bit of glue. You can add glue to the mortise and tenon as well. It just gets a little bit messy. You'll want to make sure that this area is flush, which it should be automatically. We'll countersink that and add a screw. This should be set up enough to stay in place. Remember, this is the front, this is the back. This comes in from the back. We'll want to add a little bit of glue here and here as well. We'll drop that in place. Now would be a good time to make sure that this distance is parallel. You can double check this by putting it on a surface and make sure that it doesn't rock. That seems pretty solid. And now we can connect the two sub-assemblies. Of course, we'd add a little bit more glue here. Drop that in place. Set it on its face and pre-drill. At this point, you could break all the corners, right? Just make it a little bit more friendly. Add a finish if you want. That'll keep smudges and fingerprints off it and keep it looking nice and pretty. You can see the 3/8 round over on these pieces correspond with the round portion of the handle, right? In addition, this little nub on the back of the handle, it ties in perfectly with this little groove. And the spacer block we put in earlier, that pushes the handle forward when the machine is in place, and that keeps everything nice and tight.
Prior to assembly of anything, do yourself a favor and sand all the faces of all the components. It doesn't take much. You can even do this by hand, or an orbital will work well.
The flat pack for the XL700, we can start by gluing this emblem in place. Now, you could just flip this around, drill your own size emblem, and install that if you want. Or, I'd appreciate it if you added mine. Just make sure it's not upside down and that you get my name straight. Use a block of wood to gauge that. Got a piece of wax paper, some sort of a cowl. We'll clamp that in place. While that's drying, we can go ahead and assemble the two sides and the bottom. You'll want to remove as much dust as you can.
I didn't mention it, but of course, add some glue. You could also use like a 23 gauge pin nailer that would temporarily hold everything, right? And then pre-drill and run the screws. With these areas at the edge nice and flush, everything's aligned. The bottom is nice and flush. You can use the pre-drilled holes to add some countersinks and some pilot holes.
Scoot this guy over a little. We can now attach the back, and you'll notice that the back will only go in one place. We'll add a bit more glue. Here, here, there, boom, boom, and boom. You could add a little bit to the mortise and tenon, but it just gets messy. You'll notice on the drill length, I allow the threads of the screw to grab a little bit on their own. All right, at this point we can add these vertical supports. Now this part is a bit critical. We want to maintain an exact 1.5 inch space here. So what I suggest that you do is create a block. This is 3/4 material, 19.4 millimeters, about, right, pretty close. 38.1 millimeters overall, or 1.5 inch thick. Here's some 3/4 particle board. That's also 1.5 inch. You could use some lumber Just make sure that you check that with some dial calipers to make sure that it is 1.5 inches, right? Pretty important. So again, we'll start by adding some glue. We'll put these in place. Make sure that you're flush at this location here in the front. And we can pre-drill that. Here's where I like to drop this block in place and then just add a clamp. You could add a squeeze clamp. Just make sure those stay flush. Maybe a vice grip style. Right? That would work. Leave the block in place for now. We can add some glue, more glue. Here, here, there, boom, boom. Don't go all the way up on here because these protrude slightly. Boom, glue. This will only go one way. Just like that. Gonna put this back in place. Again, pre-drill. At this point, you could break all the edges, right? Just to make it a little bit more friendly. And add a finish if you want. The finish will keep it from smudging and getting fingerprints. And now this dude is ready for your beloved domino. Boom, just like that. And that is it. It's literally that easy. And now you can clamp this to your table, workbench, right? Drop this dude in place. And now bit changing just got way easier. Yeah. Adjustments, also super easy. Everything is right here where you can get to it. But the real appeal, and the reason I came up with the dock in the first place, is that I can bring the work to the machine, right? Boom. Very repeatable, accurate, safe. As a matter of fact, I've got these 4mm mortise and tenons, 4mm dominoes, and these were cut with the XL700 with an adapter for the bit. You put that in place. Your fingers are well out of the way. You can easily make the plunge cut. If you feel like you need a bit more safety, it's simple. Add a vice grip style clamp and boom, you can make the plunge. I hope you enjoyed this video. Now that you have your dock assembled, it's time to show your domino some new tricks.